Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the Daily Gwei Refuel, where I recap the latest news in the Ethereum ecosystem. I'm your host, Anthony Sassano, and today's the 3rd of April 2023. Right, everyone, let's get into it. So, a bit of drama, I guess, over the weekend around the Arbitrum project. Now, I think a lot of you may have seen this on Twitter over the weekend and be confused about exactly what the drama is and how it kind of affects the network, how it affects the DAO, the governance, the token, all that stuff. So, I'm going to try my best to break it down here. I have a couple of threads that I want to speak to, which, of course, will be linked in the YouTube description below. But before I get started, I wanted to quickly say that I am an investor in Off-Chain Labs, the developers of Arbitrum, so just a disclaimer there. And obviously, I'm a big fan of the Arbitrum project generally. I have been a big fan of them for a very long time, for a few years now, actually, and been very supportive of them. In saying that, I'm going to try and be as objective as possible here. I'm going to try and not be biased on any one side, and I'm just going to try to stick to the facts. So what are the facts? Well, to start off with, what happened was that there was a governance proposal called AIP1, or Arbitrum Improvement Proposal 1, that was submitted to the Arbitrum governance forum / snapshot, where people could vote with their ARB tokens on it. And basically what this proposal asked was that 750 million ARB tokens would be issued to the Arbitrum Foundation, right? Now, this was obviously very controversial because everyone was like, why does the Arbitrum Foundation need $1 billion worth of ARB tokens? And, well, it came out later that this wasn't actually a vote, this was just a ratification or basically a formality, and the tokens had already been issued to the foundation as part of the initial distribution of ARB tokens that happened, I think it was last week or the week before that, when we all got our airdrop, basically, and that they had already spent, I think, 50 million ARB tokens. They sold 10 million ARB and 40 million they have lent to a market maker named Wintermute in order to market make the ARB token on the public markets. Now, they're not the only project that does this, and speaking of layer 2 projects that have done this, Optimism also, if I remember correctly, gave 20 million OP tokens or lent it out to Wintermute to market make for the OP token back when it first came out. So that's not unusual, and that's not what people are necessarily upset about and what they're kind of going on about on Twitter. What they're upset about is that, I mean, rightly or wrongly, they feel like the project, or I guess like Off-Chain Labs, has rugged them, so to speak, and has come out of nowhere with this proposal to allocate such a huge portion of the ARB tokens to themselves. Now, I think this is where a lot of the confusion stems from. The Arbitrum Foundation is a separate entity to Off-Chain Labs, right? To the developers, to the centralized company that builds the Arbitrum software. The Arbitrum Foundation was stood up when the token was launched, or shortly before the token was launched. It has a separate governing board, and it also has a separate way of funding itself. Now, a portion, or 10 million ARB that I mentioned before, was sold in order to fund the Arbitrum Foundation, or initial funding for the Arbitrum Foundation. Now, you may be wondering, why can't Off-Chain Labs use the money that they raised as part of all their VC rounds to fund this foundation? Well, this is where the legal stuff comes into it, and this is something that I think a lot of people don't understand. You cannot commingle funds in these scenarios. If you create a new entity like the Arbitrum Foundation, Off-Chain Labs cannot give the Arbitrum Foundation the funds that they raised, from my understanding at least. And that means that the Arbitrum Foundation needs to fund itself using the tokens, because the Arbitrum Foundation is what issued the token, essentially. Off-Chain Labs didn't issue the token. Again, from my understanding, I'm trying to stick to the facts here, but it can be a little bit confusing to follow along with because there are a lot of moving parts here. But that's what happens in the background with a lot of these token launches. They set up a separate foundation from the actual centralized company, and they do this for a number of different reasons. Obviously, a major reason is because a lot of these companies are based in the US, and they don't want to draw the eye of regulators. That's obviously one of the biggest reasons. 2, it just makes things a lot cleaner, right? And 3, it limits liability for the team and for, I guess, like the founding members and things like that. So it's done for multiple different reasons here. And as I said, because of that, the Arbitrum Foundation needed a way to fund itself, needed a way to pay legal costs. Obviously, they needed to get lawyers involved to do all these sorts of stuff. So they sold that 10 million ARB to ensure that the foundation had enough money to fund itself. Now, obviously, that's a lot of money, right? Let's just assume ARB was $1, and that was the price that they got for the 10 million ARB. That's $10 million. But I don't think people realize how expensive these things can get very, very quickly. Obviously, not $10 million expensive, but they obviously wanted to make sure that the funding was at least future-proof for, you know, at least some period of time, right? I don't know what the period of time is, but for the foreseeable future sort of thing. So those are all the kind of like facts that I've gathered from reading all the threads and things like that. And there are a bunch of other moving parts here that I may have glossed over. But as I said, there are two main threads from Arbitrum themselves, which you can read. I'll link them in the YouTube description below. But as I said before, the drama basically stemmed from the fact that this proposal was even put out there in the first place. Now, where I draw issue, or where I take issue with this, is not so much that I believe that Off-Chain Labs is trying to rug anyone, that Arbitrum is trying to rug anyone, or that they are purposely trying to just sell tokens and enrich themselves. I don't believe that for a second. But the issue is that their communication here was really, really poor on a number of different fronts. Like, firstly, they didn't communicate that the proposal wasn't actually a real proposal, that it was just a formality, and the decision to allocate those tokens had already been made before TGE. So they didn't communicate that at all in the proposal, and they didn't communicate that properly before the proposal was put out there. And then once they did communicate it, it kind of felt like a band-aid, right? It was like people being like, okay, well, you only communicated it because everyone called you out on it, blah, blah, blah. So the communication here was not great at all. I mean, it was terrible, to be honest, right? And because of that, I think rightfully copped a lot of heat for that. I think one of the things that a lot of projects in crypto need to be very, very aware of is that communication is key. As long as you communicate things ahead of time, you 9 times out of 10 can I guess, like, avoid this drama and avoid this fallout. Now, I say 9 times out of 10 because sometimes the drama happens anyway. And a perfect example of this, while I'm on this topic, was that Off-Chain Labs, a couple of days ago, announced that they were moving a large sum of ARB tokens to a custodian. And then there was an account on Twitter called, I believe, Look On Chain, or an on-chain analytics account, that basically, I think today, put out a tweet and said, a large number of ARB tokens was moved to, I believe it was Coinbase. Now, they weren't moved to Coinbase to be sold, and those tokens belong to investors and team members. They were moved to Coinbase to custody, and Off-Chain Labs had already communicated this on April 1st. It wasn't like this was something that they hadn't warned, I guess, like the market about, or warned the community about. This was happening. Now, for those of you who don't know, and I know this because I'm an investor in Off-Chain Labs, they gave the investors two choices. You could either custody your funds via Coinbase custody, or custody your ARB via Coinbase custody, and it would be vested out on the normal 4-year vesting schedule with the 1-year cliff. So no investors or team members have their tokens yet. They are just in the custodian. The custodian obviously custodies the funds, right, and then pays it out to people. The same thing was done for the OP token as well, by the way. Or the second choice was to have an on-chain smart contract that would custody the funds, and the person, individual, group, fund, VC, whatever, could claim the tokens once they had vested out on that vesting schedule from that contract. So as I said, like, you can communicate things, and 9 times out of 10 it'll be fine, but there are always exceptions. There's this 1 time out of 10 where I saw all the replies to that Look On Chain tweet talking about this, and no one was interested in the facts because they were already, I guess, like, got their pitchforks out about all this Arbitrum DAO governance kind of like shenanigans going on. So the truth was kind of buried, and no one really cared about the truth there. So I just wanted to clear that one up there for you guys. But back on the topic of governance here more broadly, there were people saying things as well like, if the ARB token isn't actually being used as a governance token, well, that means that the foundation basically retains control of the Arbitrum protocol, and that makes ARB a security, or that means there's going to be legal proceedings against the foundation, and all this sorts of stuff. I don't know too much about that and the consequences there, or what can happen with that. I doubt there's going to be much stuff around that. It feels like a lot of people on Twitter jump to conclusions very, very quickly. That happens with so many things, right? It's very, very annoying. But outside of that, as I said, very, very poor communication on the part of the foundation, Off-Chain Labs as well, and just like the Arbitrum kind of core team, or team generally, right? Which they've since tried to obviously make up for, and I think they've very much learned their lesson from this. You learn that lesson once, I think. Like, you only need to one, I guess, like relatively big screw up to learn that lesson and not make that mistake again. So hopefully, I mean, obviously going forward, that hopefully they don't make that mistake again with the poor communication here. But I have personally been satisfied with their explanation of things with their threads here. I honestly think that this is a case of crypto Twitter getting their pitchforks out about something that they're just going to forget about. I kind of said on Twitter today, like, think how quickly people forget about things like even things like USDC. So when USDC depegged on a couple of weeks ago now on the weekend, there was so many takes. Like, it was incredible. Everyone on crypto Twitter had their pitchforks out. Everyone said that USDC was going to fail, that it was a scam, blah, 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 all these sorts of stuff, right? And I remember at the time saying that, one, it's going to be fine. Even though they have lost a bit of market share over the depegging event, USDC is at $1 and redemptions are fine, right? And the money that they had in Silvergate Bank is also fine. And two, that I believed that everyone would forget about it very, very quickly. And they did. Like, within 48 hours, no one was talking about it anymore. You're going to see the same thing happen with this Arbitrum DAO stuff as well. Now, is that a good or bad thing is another thing I want to talk about. Well, at the end of the day, it doesn't actually matter if it's a good or bad thing, because the problem, I guess, or like the world we live in, and I do think it's a problem, but the world we live in today is one with a 24/7 news cycle. There is no way possible for a human to be able to keep track of everything happening in one industry, let alone all industries. Even me, who covers this stuff every single weekday, right? And I try to keep on top of it. I spend so much time in it. There is absolutely no way for me to be on top of everything. And then there are plenty of things that I don't cover on the Refuel that people may think are important or interested in, but I just don't have the ability to do that. I'm not a machine, right? I'm not an AI. I'm a human. I can't keep up. And obviously, I'm not the only one. If I can't even keep up, someone who literally spends all his time on these sorts of stuff, can you imagine how many other people aren't able to keep up either? And that's exactly why things move very quickly and people forget about things very quickly. And that's why, for better or worse, a lot of these things don't actually materialize into things that people think they do. A lot of the time, what dictates whether they succeed or fail really is just the long term. It's just long term. Over the long term, what's going to dictate if Arbitrum succeeds or fails as a protocol will be, if it can sell its block space, essentially, right? And as a DAO, it will be if people are actually interested in being part of the governance process. Personally, I'm pretty bearish on DAOs generally, at least for the foreseeable future. I think that most projects are just going to end up with a governing council that essentially looks like a public company with a board of directors. And I think that's totally fine. I think that governance minimization is very important. So basically getting it to the point where governance only controls things or only has control over things like a treasury, for example, rather than having control over the protocol. So let's just use Arbitrum as an example here. Let's say the end state is that the Arbitrum protocol is completely ossified. It cannot be upgraded on chain. It has to go through a hard fork if it wants to upgrade, right? So it has to go through a kind of off-chain governance process like that, but it can't be changed, right? There's no on-chain upgrade of the smart contracts or anything like that. There's no upgradable smart contracts. It has to be done via a hard fork or something like that. And let's just say that the Arbitrum DAO only has control over the treasury. Well, in that case, you could say that the Arbitrum protocol is decentralized and the treasury, for better or worse, is controlled by the DAO, and the DAO is really just the governing council of a trusted kind of like bunch of people that allocate resources how they see fit. Or like not just how they see fit, but also via community input and votes of the ARB token and things like that. But generally, that's how I view a lot of these governance kind of things, or DAOs. I mean, I wouldn't even call them DAOs in that state. I would call them maybe DOs, decentralized organizations, where you've still got a decentralization and a distribution of people, but it's much more concentrated. It's not like, thousands of people. That's never going to happen. There's no kind of organization on earth that has thousands of people making decisions and has an equal say in anything. No, that's not how it works. It doesn't scale. It doesn't scale for centralized companies. It will not scale for decentralized protocols. It's probably even worse in decentralized protocols than it is with centralized companies. And I think that's okay. But that's just a tangent about DAOs generally. I'm not going to rant more about that because I'm going way over time here. I've spent 15 minutes on this so far, but hopefully that covers the majority of what happened there. As I said, I probably missed things because there's a lot of moving parts here, but you can read these 2 threads from Arbitrum for more details on everything here and everything that happened. And yeah, you can go check that out for yourself. It'll be linked in the YouTube description below. But on that note, going to move on to the rest of the news for today. All right, on to some news that only came out a couple of hours ago or a few hours ago, so I am not totally up to speed with what is happening here. There is still information coming out about it, but a major MEV event just went down, as Hudson Jameson says here. So his thread is basically a meta thread of what happened. You can find the link to it in the YouTube description below. But essentially what happened, from my understanding, is that a validator was able to steal a bunch of MEV from an MEV searcher or a builder performing sandwich attacks. Now, for those of you who don't know what sandwich attacks are, they are basically a really toxic form of MEV, where essentially MEV is used to... I don't know if the word steal is the right word to use here, but it essentially, for all intents and purposes, does look like stealing people's assets from things like liquidity pools. So as I said, it is a very toxic form of MEV, and Truth here explains that sandwiches, both front run and back run transactions, they can do this because bundles define the front run buy transaction, victim buy transaction, and back run sell transaction in one, and trust validators to execute it all together. The validator in this instance inserted their own sell transaction after the sandwich of front run. So basically, as I said, stole the MEV. The validator itself stole the MEV here from the builder. Now, Hudson has his own explanation here. And he says he's not an MEV expert either, but he has this explanation in this thread about this too, which I'll link in the YouTube description below. And Mudit Gupta, the CISO at Polygon Labs, also has a description about this. And I forgot to mention that the amount of money that was stolen from the searcher was over 25 million US dollars. So not chump change. It's actually a ton of money here. So Mudit basically said, the validator that did this takes a sandwich bundle from the MEV bot and replaces the victim transaction with its own that exploits the MEV bot instead. That's the TLDR of what happens, and Mudit has a better description here for you to read over. Now, I don't have a proper explain like I'm 5 or anything just yet because, as I said, this only came out a couple of hours ago. I haven't had time to digest it, but I figured it was worth highlighting because I saw some people in the Discord channel talking about this, so I felt it was really interesting, so I wanted to put it on your radar here. As I've said before, MEV is still the, I guess, like, biggest existential risk to all blockchains, every single blockchain, even Bitcoin, if it is not dealt with in the proper way. Now, dealing with it in the proper way is a big open research problem and question, and there's a ton of different ways to do it, but they all have trade-offs. Ethereum is currently using the MEV Boost software as a way to essentially democratize MEV and also protect the network against the harmful effects of MEV. It is not a perfect solution. It comes with trade-offs because you're using things like relayers, which, as we've seen in the past, can censor on a large scale, and there's not many of those relayers either. Even though it's gotten a lot better over time, which I'm going to talk about in a sec, it's still not great, right? So, and it centralizes, it tends to centralize block building and things like that. So, obviously, there is a lot of things to consider here, and PBS and stuff like that I've talked about in the past. There's a lot going on here, but this is again more evidence of why MEV is such a serious issue for blockchains, because stuff like this can lead to instability of the chain. I'm not saying it will in this instance, but it can, over time, as the profit opportunities become more lucrative, as people become more sophisticated, and more of these attacks happen, they can happen at a larger and larger scale and could potentially lead to some very negative consequences. So, as I said, this is just more evidence of that point that I've been making for a little while now. But you can check out both Hudson's and Mudit's thread, which I'll link in the YouTube description below. And as I mentioned just before, I wanted to talk a bit more about MEV Boost relayers. Well, Tony, who I've talked about a bunch on the review before, you'll know him from the MEVBoost.pix website. that I've talked about, basically put out a nice GIF looking at the relays. So he said here, today, 4 relays hold 18 to 30% market share each. Rsync builders' share climbed from 10% in early March to a stable 15% now. No builder has more than 25% market share. 4 out of 35 are at 15 to 25%. So we have a nicely distributed builder and relay kind of ecosystem right now. It is still not great. Obviously, these numbers are quite small. It's not a huge deal, I guess. You know, it's not as centralizing as something like concentration of validators are, but it's definitely not totally ideal. And definitely, we want to see more relayers and more builders come online, but this is very sophisticated stuff. It is not easy, and honestly, without Flashbots developing MEV boost, this ecosystem would look very, very different. There would probably only be a very, very small, not even a handful of big players that would be competing in this market, because it would just be too hard for everyone else. This is very sophisticated stuff. It's very technical, and if you mess up, you can stand to lose a lot of money if you mess up trying to do certain things here, depending on what you're trying to do. But yeah, you can check out this GIF. I'll link the tweet in the YouTube description below, but it's also on this GitHub page here where it's interactive, so you can check it out here as well, which will be linked in the tweet here. All right, so Vitalik has published a blog post that I thought was worth highlighting, titled, "How Will Ethereum's Multi-Client Philosophy Interact with ZK-EVMs?" So obviously ZK-EVMs has been the talk of the town over the last few weeks and a few months even, and multi-client or client diversity is at the heart of what makes Ethereum special. Now, I've talked about client diversity so many times on the refuel before. You can see this website here, client diversity, .com, where there's a screenshot here that Vitalik has included in his blog post showing how we have 5 different consensus layer clients and 4 different execution layer clients that have the majority of the market share. And this is what we mean by client diversity. There's not just one client. There's not just Geth, right? Or there's not just Nethermind on the execution layer side, or there's not just Prism, not just Lighthouse. There is a diversity of clients here, and that's very, very important for a number of different reasons that I've talked about on the refuel before. But basically, when looking at this, you kind of start asking yourself, you know, should we have a multi-client philosophy for ZK-EVMs or layer 2s, and how does it actually affect layer 2s? Like, how does the layer 1 client diversity and multi-client philosophy affect these layer 2s? Like, how can they interact with it? How will ZK-EVMs come in on layer 1 in the future? What does this mean for things like enshrined rollups and stuff like that? So you can check out all of this in his blog post here. I'm obviously not going to read it out, but I'll link that in the YouTube description below. But I felt it was worth highlighting because it is definitely a very important topic in the Ethereum ecosystem, and something that we need to be talking about now and focusing on now before it potentially becomes maybe an issue or a problem down the line that becomes something that we need to deal with at that point. All right, so I came across this tweet thread here from Nazar, who's building monobase.xyz, and he said that they're introducing something called Universal Frontend, which is a procedurally generated front end for every Ethereum contract. So essentially, this Universal Frontend tool allows you to interact with any contract on the Ethereum network. One page outlines all the functions that the contract has, and you can enter function parameters in line. Now, what's really cool about this is that typically you'll interact with one of these smart contracts via something like Etherscan, where it'll give you a front end, but it'll be very, very basic. It's not going to be anything that's going to handhold. You know, it's not going to be anything that's going to explain something to you. Basically, you get a list of the function names. You have to kind of assume what they do and guess what they do, and then you are able to interact with them by connecting your MetaMask wallet to it. Well, that's good, and I've used it a bunch of times, and I haven't really had any issues with it, but I'm definitely more technical than most people, and even I look at the functions, and I'm like, do I really want to interact with this function? It doesn't seem to be something that is trustworthy, but yeah, because of that, this new kind of universal front end, gives you more information. It won't give you like everything that you need to make sure that if something's safe or to understand exactly what something is doing, but it'll give you more information around this, and it'll prettify it for you as well. You can see here, basically it's much more detailed and color coded and things like that than something like Etherscan. So I just figured this was worth highlighting because I know a bunch of you have interacted with contracts manually on Etherscan before for one reason or another. Usually it's to claim things like airdrop tokens when the network is when the RPC is busy. So for example, with Arbitrum, the ARB token, the RPC was really busy. So you could basically go to Etherscan, well, Arbiscan, I should say, which was also very busy, but interact with the contract from there in order to essentially claim your ARB tokens. Now, as I said, Arbiscan was actually overloaded at that point. So if you had something like Universal Frontend, you could interact with the contract, or potentially interact with the contract using this instead of having to rely on Arbiscan. But anyway, I'll link this in the YouTube description below for you to check out. All right, another project that I came across just a couple of days ago was called ContractReader.io. So this is obviously related to what I was just talking about with Universal Frontend. But basically what this does is it uses AI, specifically GPT-4, to create something called smart contract reviews. So what this does is it gives you a near instant code review of mainnet or testnet smart contracts. So this is obviously one out there for most of the developers, but also for people who just want to know what a contract is doing, what a smart contract is doing, with without having to ask a smart contract developer or professional bug them about it. But this basically uses AI to break this all down for you, which I thought was very, very cool. I know AI is a huge topic right now. I think within coding and scripting and reading code and translating that, I think it's doing a really great job in that area. And this is just another tool that you could use in order to do this. So you can see here that in their example, they're using the CoolCats smart contract here. They input the address and then they click review this contract, and then it gives you a description of what this contract is doing in plain English. There's no code here or anything like that. It's just giving plain English, and it's pulling out the relevant functions to tell you what they do. So as I was saying before, you could actually use this tool in conjunction with the Universal Frontend in order to manually interact with smart contracts to do whatever you wanted at the end of the day, which is really, really cool. So these two go hand in hand. I'll link them in the YouTube description below for you to check out. But I just thought that this was a really cool use of AI. All right, so ETHGlobal has announced the 11 Scaling Ethereum 2023 finalists. Now, I have covered one of these before, OP-Clave, which I covered last week on the Refuel, but there are 10 others here that you can check out for yourself, and they're all linked here on the ETHGlobal website. I just wanted to highlight this thread for you guys to go check out. I haven't had the time to review them myself just yet, but these ETHGlobal run events are always packed full of great projects. So if they're anything like the OP-Clave project in terms of quality, then 100% they're going to be awesome. So definitely go check this out. I'll link it in the YouTube description below. Next up, we have a rebranding. So Element Finance, which I've talked about on the Refuel before, and I should disclose that I'm an investor in, has announced a new name, a new identity, and a new product. So their new name is DELV, D-E-L-V. They're not called Element Finance anymore, and they are calling themselves the Factory of DeFi. Essentially, they are DELV encapsulates a suite of products, including the Element Protocol, Alphiverse, Echo, Hyperdrive, Council, and Agent Zero. Now, I've talked about a bunch of these projects before. Element Finance is obviously their DeFi protocol here for fixed rates. You have Hyperdrive, which I've talked about before, Council, which is a governance rollup, and a bunch of other products that they've got under their umbrella here. So if you're wondering what happened to Element Finance, this is what happened. They changed their name to DELV, and you can go check out all of their products. They've linked them in the tweet thread here, which I'll, of course, link in the YouTube description below. All right, last up, as I said before, the ZK wars are heating up. Well, Daniel from the Polygon Zero team has put together a nice little blog post here titled A Comparison of ZK-EVMs. And as I said, it is little. It is not very long. So you can go check out this for just a brief overview of the different ZK-EVMs that are currently live or in production in the Ethereum ecosystem. I know there has been so much kind of debate around this on Twitter. between the different teams. Honestly, I think a lot of the debate is a pissing contest. If I kind of use that analogy or use that terminology, I should say, there, because it doesn't feel like it's pushing the space forward. It doesn't feel like anyone's really getting anything out of it. All it feels like is that these different ZK developers and researchers are all trying to argue that their ZK-EVM is best and that they, what they're building is amazing and what their competitors are building are not. And, this one's a real ZK-EVM and this one's not. At the end of the day, look, most users, pretty much all users, are not going to care about that stuff. They're going to care about what is usable to them, what is a good user experience, what is secure, of course, but they're not going to care about what type of ZK-EVM they're using. They're not going to care about that it's not exactly EVM equivalent or or to spec or whatever. Like, they don't care about that sorts of stuff. As I said, it is a pissing contest for researchers on Twitter, from what I've seen, just to one-up each other, and it's turned a bit toxic over the last, I guess, couple of weeks, which I really don't appreciate, because I hate seeing that, especially within the Ethereum family, because it feels like my kids are fighting, so to speak, right? I feel like the big dad, as involved as I am with Ethereum, I feel like I'm sitting there watching all the kids fights. Like, please stop, stop fighting. You don't want to see that, but it is what it is, and I think it's going to continue. I don't think it's going to slow down. There are a lot of egos at play here, which I totally understand. People want to see their work succeed, but I hope that it doesn't get too toxic. But anyway, you can read this little post here from Daniel. I'll link it in the YouTube description below. But that's going to be it for today. So thank everyone for listening and watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the newsletter, join the Discord channel, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Thanks, everyone.